population segments. That means street kids, it means prostitutes, it means gang members, slum dwellers, things like that. And then a couple of years ago, the board of city team voted unanimously to say this thing has gotten to a size and a scope that it really needs to be a standalone organization. So they set us apart to become new generations. And from that time to this, that's who we are. And that's the brief story.
Sorry, I was muted there, but you gave us a bit of a scope of 52 countries and stuff. How many, give us a little bit more of the metric in terms of the scope.
Yeah, and the headline I always use is the story of God's glory, because I wanted to point back to him, not to us or a philosophy, a strategy, or a system, but God in his grace. In the last 15 years, since March 2005, we're looking at well north of 70,000 new churches that encompass over 1.7 million new followers of Jesus. And our main business is creating movements, catalyzing movements. And we define a movement as at least 100 new churches that have multiplied to at least 4 generations. Well, right now we're tracking 127 movements by that definition, and there's 6 of them that now are north of 30 generations of churches planting churches, planting churches. The reason that's such a big deal is because if you can't release something that can continue to reproduce with quality without you, you can't be having a Great Commission conversation. And when you get to 30 generations of something away from you, it's no longer your money, your management, or even your influence. It boils down to the DNA of the kingdom that the Spirit of God planted and nurtured to where it's going to continue to do what he said way back in Matthew 28, make disciples everywhere, teach them to obey, and get them to repeat the process.
Younoussa, welcome back. How's things in West Africa today?
Well, it is confinement. This is implemented differently, depending on the country or the city or even individuals. But then the headline is confinement and social distancing.
Yeah.
And struggle for the church to learn new way of doing church and doing ministry.
Okay. So very much like us.
These are the headlines.
Yeah, very much like us. So give me a little rundown on your connection with City Team and the whole how you got involved and with New Generations. So not the whole story, but just the abbreviated story.
Okay, the 2 hours version.
We don't have coffee to do it. And
when the Lord took me from Islam to him, and this was in 1987, and then I would say that late 89, I was involved in trying to share my faith and join a team of missionaries who are trying to reach out to Muslims to plant churches among Muslims. And we're seeing some Muslims coming to Christ. We are about 40, 50 member church of MBBs, and this was a lot of excitement. But then it seemed that this was a plateau, that we hit a ceiling. For I would say more than 7 years, it was like we could not pass that number of member of that church. Apart from that, I was also trying to mobilize the church to kind of help the church understand the need to reach out to Muslims. I'm also trying to do my own level thing to continue to not only what we had started as a team, Muslim, but to reach out to other places. But very quickly, I realized that we're doing many things, a lot of activities, a lot of programs, having a lot of discussions, making a lot of decisions. But the result was not what we were expecting. Well, there is always a way to spiritualize that. Say Barnabas did that, and then Paul did this, and then the Lord brought the fruits. But personally, I was not satisfied. I was still trying to find ways how to see breakthrough among some gateway people group in sub-Saharan Africa. These are the people group that if they are reached, the whole continent will be reached. Think about the Hausa, the Fulani, the Kanuri. There are these people group that, not only by the number, but also the location across the continent. If you reach them, you make a big difference. But we're trying a lot of things, and feel like we're hitting a wall. So I was struggling with that situation, and in 2005, I was exposed to training, DMM training by David Watson. In fact, I was asked to organize that here in Francophone West Africa. That I did. Struggle a little bit with that. But I implemented just to see if it will work or not. In fact, I decided to implement and demonstrate that it will not work here. But it worked. It worked, and so with other leaders, we try to say, okay, let's try it in other places. We did, and it was working. So by end of 2005 and early 2006, I came to the point where, for me, I say, wow, it seems that I have found a golden key to unlock this very, very resistant people group. They are just an example. The Malinke people group here in Cote d'Ivoire for many years. Almost more than 50, 40 years of a lot of activities. The result was not, in 2003, we did a survey and we found 7 believers. And you know why? 4 of the 7 were in the US, and this is where they became Christian. So in the country, we had 3. But when I was exposed to GMM and called someone that we had deployed among these people in the northwest of the country, spent 1 week with him, did the training. I said, okay, go back, forget anything that I have taught you before, and try this. And I say, after 3 months, if you don't see anything, then you forget it, and we come back to usual business. Well, after 3 months, there were almost nothing. So I say, okay, let's forget it. And then he said, no, I haven't had what we were looking for, like to start a Discovery Bible study or find Person of Peace. You say, I haven't had all of that, but the access to the community have become different for me. It has become easier. So give me 3 more months, and then I'll try again. Say, okay. So these other 3 months, I was able to start 6 Discovery Bible study groups, and 3 of them had become churches.
Wow.
So I said, okay, if we can work among the Malenke here, I think it can work anywhere.
Yeah.
So I started contacting the leaders in Africa in the network that I had built all these years to expose them to the same principle and ask them to try if it will work. And until now, anywhere someone has tried this principle, they have seen results that they have never seen.
Wow.
So for me, I think I have found the golden key.
You became a believer, huh?
Yeah.
So we want to tackle 2 subjects today. One of the subjects deals with the curtain that's been pulled down around us, this COVID that is seemingly now a global issue. Every person on the globe is experiencing the same thing at the same time. But also, its impact on the Western church, because obviously we're no longer meeting in spaces and things like that. And there's a sense in which there's maybe quietly behind the scenes, people are cheering that, in the sense is that the church is now out of the building, supposedly. So I want you guys to respond to that from your mind, your movement mindsets. And the second thing I would love to do is, you mentioned, Younoussa, that you found those 4 Malinke, in the U.S. And I know that in this past year, New Generations, which has been typically focused on unreached people groups around the world, has also added to its portfolio North America and begun to think about what it would look like to assist the North American church in leaning into movement. I'd love to get a feel for that. But let's start with the virus. That's what I think where a lot of our minds are, and its interaction. What would be, Harry, your kind of commentary in terms of a movement leader? You've seen so many things happen, globally and stuff, and now you're experiencing, a shutdown of the legacy church as we've known it. What's going on in your mind about that when you see that?
Yeah, there's a politician who once said, never waste a crisis. I don't remember who it was. Let me nuance that. There's a kingdom opportunity in every crisis. Everybody knows that when crisis hits of any kind, personal crisis, country crisis, world crisis, everybody's attention is focused on something different. It breaks the routine. So you have an opportunity. So the question is, what is God going to do in this opportunity, and what is the purpose of this opportunity? Now, when you have the imposed social distance, that doesn't mean you have to have spiritual isolation. It does mean you have to do things differently. And in doing things differently, you have to have the creativity and the initiative to see what the opportunity presents. So here's just some ideas along that way. That you as a person who wants to catalyze something, catalyze a movement, what that means, it's a chain reaction that's going to work through natural networks. Well, that's something that's interrupted right now. And so it's the worst time to gather, but it's the best time to get ready. How do you get ready? Well, the first thing you want to do is be conspicuously spiritual. You want to make sure that people know that you are one who is drawing from the things of God to deal with this situation. Then you want to be conspicuously strong. People who are in fear draw strength from those who are stable. Then you want to be conspicuous in your service. So as you begin to use the opportunity to make connections. Those are the connections you're going to harvest in days to come. So just some practical things. My wife has been sewing up masks, out of cloth and so forth, and offering them to people that are in the neighborhood or that we're coming across. And right now, the desperate shortage for masks isn't there as much as it was at the beginning. But you know what? It says, A, I'm proactive. B, I care about you. And 3, now there's an open door for a conversation, because the next words are, if you don't need a mask, how's your family doing? And then often these people are saying, well, what is God doing in this, when you start talking about how God is going to use this? Well, in that situation, now you have an open door to begin to lay a foundation for the future. Now, there's a lot more things I can share on that, but just as an introduction, the idea here is God's people have to move through 3 levels. One is they have to get out of the fear factor that compasses around their heart. Then they have to get past the place of, well, I'm at peace, everything's going to be okay, God's in control, and move to the point of action. And that action is going to have 3 theaters in it. It's going to be, what are you going to do with you and your family? What's God's purpose and plan in this? What are you going to do in your community or in networks? And what are you going to do in a world that's in crisis? We can talk about all those layers, but I would encourage Christians, especially Christian leaders, to think in those 3 theaters for what is the kingdom opportunity that God has embedded into this crisis.
So Younoussa, how about you in terms of the crisis and what it's saying to the church, how the church is responding? Is there any difference, you see looking into the U.S. from outside?
Well, I think this COVID-19 pandemic, it is global, because it seems that the decision that people are doing in different countries, there are many things that are the same: confinement, social distancing, etc. For me, I think it seems that we haven't seen all the things that this COVID-19 will create. Mm-hmm. But what I can say now is that the church will not be spared by the effects of what is happening, because you remember in Egypt when God was sending these plagues, all the 9 plagues, people were not spared. So only the last plague that they were spared. So I think what the society, what the country will experience, there will be a ripple effect on the church. Okay, now there is confinement, and many people are working from home. And here, and I think in other places, people are trying to find ways how to continue to do church differently. People use a lot of, online means to communicate with their church members. For the first time, last Sunday, I had to organize communion using Zoom. I've never thought about having communion using Zoom. But this is one of the things. So, and the other thing that I see when I look at the whole thing regarding the church, it seems to me that the church has become a system. Okay, let me say the church has has been building a tower, a Babel tower.
We're recording.
And I think, yeah, I can, all these structures, all these, all the things that we have put in place as a church that has made the church heavy, cannot move, and this COVID-19 is, is collapsing, making that system collapse. And I'm very glad with that.
Mm-hmm.
I think this will give us the opportunity to sit down, to pray, to listen to God, and to come back to the key principles, to the key values. A disciple of Christ, the church, and we will have to find ways to do church differently, to do ministry differently. Okay, here in West Africa, we started having problem because of the terrorists in the Sahel. One of the things that we have experienced here is all these buildings. When these Islamists come and they burn the church building, people stop going to the meetings. But the places where it's happened in Niger, in Burkina Faso, where we have ministry, there is no one DMM church that stops its activities. Mm-hmm. Because they have nothing to burn. These small churches continue their activities. In Burkina Faso, I was there about a week before this confinement decisions were made. What we decided was just, instead of meeting in one place, let the groups move. So we were learning from that situation, and then this COVID-19 confinement came. And here again, I think it was 2 weeks ago, we had Baptists. Yes, we are following the what the government say. Mm-hmm. You put your mask, you put gloves, but we baptize. Now the baptism I'm talking about, the way it was done, we say, okay, don't do it that again. Don't touch people. So now the pastor stands here, the person to be baptized stands there. He asks question, he replies, and then you bury yourself and you come out. Yeah. So we will have to find ways, yeah, and listen to God. And I think this is the very, very important aspect, to listen to God. Yeah. I think this situation will change our structures, our many things, but at the spiritual level, my relationship with God, my obedience, I think it will improve a lot for Christian. Mm-hmm. Because now people have to think. I know here in Abidjan, yesterday I was talking to a pastor. I said, okay, how are you doing with the church? And he said, okay, now I have put the whole church in small groups, and every Saturday we meet the leaders of the group. So it is no more than 50. So a big room. So we have 1 meter between people. So we do a training, and then during the week they meet in houses. And what is happening there is Now he is using ordinary people.
Mm.
The church used to say, if we have not done 2-year or 3-year Bible school, you cannot lead. Now he's using ordinary people. He will spend time with them, train them, and then they go back and they serve in these small groups.
Yeah. You know,
So,
in the West, unlike that, we have pivoted to moving from 3-dimensional presentations in auditoriums to 2-dimensional presentations on screens. And so everyone's got good at producing something online. And there's a sense in which some of the movement crowd was cheering the move of the church out of the buildings. Now finally, people are going to meet in smaller groups, but it's not just about meeting in smaller groups. It's not just about, there's a function here. There's underneath it, there's DNA that has to take place. But, I see people just becoming greater consumers now, because used to they get in their cars and drive to a building at a particular time on Sunday. Now they don't even have to get out of their pajamas. They just go to the screen, put it on, and they get their dose of the ghost, on Sunday, and that's what they need, and they move on. And it's that kind, that brand of Christendom, that is affected or has been so ineffective, in our culture. So, Harry, we've got a question here asking you to repeat those areas that you mentioned before. And I know those things come out of you like air, Can you go back and recap those?
Yeah, sure. What I would advocate to all believers, and especially Christian leaders, that they're thinking in 3 tiers or theaters. One is you and your family. What is God doing in the midst of this that relates to you? How are you going to use that opportunity? You can use that opportunity to do deeper family stuff, greater discipleship, take some time to go deeper with God, whatever God is saying in terms of you and your family, the close in. Then you get to your community and your networks. And there's all kinds of things we can unpack there. And we'll do that if we have time. But it basically says you want to be taking action. And I gave 3 tiers before of you want to get away from the fear, past the peace, into the action stage. And certainly the second theater is your network, your communities, where you can be proactive to make something happen. And what you're doing in that proactive is laying a foundation for future ministry, which is part of finding the kingdom opportunity. The third theater is what God is doing in the world. There's a terrible temptation to be inward focused and isolated in times of crisis, especially when it's affecting you. This is the first time in modern memory when there's something that affects everybody. You think about it, earthquake, famine, fire, flood, it's very localized. A nuclear bomb could go off and it would be much more localized than this. So what that does is it diffuses the response. It makes it much harder to deal with something. In a time like that, people who are thinking with kingdom thoughts should not be just thinking about themselves. They should be thinking about what's happening with people far away. I'll just give you a taste of how bad it can be. So I was on the phone yesterday with our East Africa director, a guy named Ila Tassi. He is way up in the boonies where he got trapped and is now on 21-day isolation because they shut down the country before he could get home to Nairobi. And what he was describing is in the last 2 years, there has been drought that produced famine. Then came floods. Then came a swarm of locusts. Then came coronavirus. And now there's a new bloom of locusts that are coming that is 10 times bigger than the first one. In the midst of all of that, he's feeling like nobody knows the difficulty they're going to be facing. There is no good health care, no bailouts, whatever else. So the point of that is that even though the crisis is here at home, it's on our doorstep and in our homes, we cannot limit our kingdom-minded thinking to just what is here. We also have to be thinking there. So 3 theaters. Your local, your personal, your local, and what God's doing in the world.
So just let me push the pause button for a moment. What is New Generations doing, if anything, to stimulate help for guys like Isla and other country leaders around the world?
Yeah, there's two parts to that answer. The first part is I gave the guys on the ground the freedom to repurpose people and reposition money to meet the need. We have all our plans. We're going to do all these things in church planning and so forth. I said, God has intervened. Now is the time for you to take the resources he's already given and turn it in to helping hurting people, expressing God's heart, which lays the foundation for future expansion of the kingdom. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we're actively inviting other people to join in this. And it's the worst possible time to raise money. Everybody's hurting. The stock market is down. Everybody's concerned about local kind of needs, understandably. But 2 Corinthians chapter 8 is a beautiful illustration to where the people in Macedonia, out of their poverty, gave with generosity because they said, that's what God wants us to do. So we're giving an avenue. And giving an avenue, something I'll say back here when the time is right, we have to be a catalyst, we have to be the channel, and we have to be the coach to keep the momentum going. Those things apply to here, they apply to there. Give people the track to run on so the ones who want to help know what to do.
Okay. And I know, from our interaction that really Corona is only one of, as you mentioned, flood, famine, locust, but starvation is becoming a real critical issue because their infrastructure literally has shut down, and the ability to move food through their logistics chains is not there. And so, we're going to face on the backside of Corona huge starvation issues in places like India, parts of Africa, and different places. So
it's already true, and we are responding, but the magnitude is overwhelming. So, even at the prayer level, everybody ought to be praying that God would stop the plague, he would heal the sick, he would repair the damage, and he would open the door for future opportunities.
Yeah. So I was actually, I'm sitting in my office here in north side of Kansas City. It was in this house where the discussion took place between our global team to lean into the North American region. So there's a question here that was asked. It says, can such movements occur in the U.S.? Are the cultural differences too great? What are the implications for the U.S. or North America church amid the pandemic upheaval? Let's deal with the first part of that. I know that it was a bit of a surprise for you, Harry, on our team being so adamant about moving into this North American region and thinking about it as quickly as you were thinking about it. So describe that and give me some of the whys.
Yeah. First let me say I'm a table pounding, absolutely God can make movements here in the United States just like he is doing around the world. So that's an unequivocal, high energy, high impact kind of a statement. And what's the why behind that? But the why behind that is when Jesus left the earth and told the guys on the ground, hey, go everywhere, win everyone, and do it with nothing. Basic paraphrase. He didn't exclude us. And whatever we think our barriers are, let's talk about the barriers other places of witchcraft and radical Islam and all of the infrastructure issues and all of the lack of resources, et cetera. The issue is you work around the barriers. So yeah, it can happen here. It's as simple as this. God asks us to obey and encourage friends and family to do the same. That works here just like it works there. And so when the international leaders from literally around the world were saying for such a time as this for the United States, I gave it a hearty amen. And I'm completely committed to the concept, not that we just should, but that it will happen here.
Mm-hmm. So let me just say, for our Canadian friends, North America. So
yes. And I'll say the amen to that as well.
Okay, so when we say North America, we mean, Canada and the U.S. And because of language barriers, we don't mean Mexico at this point, and stuff. So, Younoussa, if I recall correctly, you were one of the most vocal proponents for it. Now is the time for us to lean in and help the church in North America get a movement mindset. What was going on inside your heart and mind in that discussion back in February of 19?
Yeah, but please allow me to go back a little bit regarding this COVID-19 and what is happening with the church. My prayer is that because of this situation, the church now is helping families, to do church at home. It seemed to me that one of the things that this will create, there are many people, for them church is only Sunday to meet the crowd. I think after several weeks or months in doing this, having this time in the family or with a couple of friends, people will start asking questions, saying, oh, so it is possible to do church that way. And I'm expecting that this will create something in the church that will lead to GMM in the West, yes, in North America, but in the West. Now, to come back to your question, I think the North America has been and continue to be driving force for global missions at different levels. The thought, the thinking, the strategies, and even sending people. Sometimes it is painful for me because when I look at, what I have seen, read, and heard, it seemed to me that there came a point where the church redefined what is success. It seemed to me that there was a time when a local church will be very proud when they send missionaries. But it seemed to me that the time came when in North America, success was bigger, better. So if I have a church that look like an airport, then this is success. Mm-hmm. But what followed that redefinition of success was two trends that is still there. The decrease of the number of Christians and also the decrease of the influence of Christianity in the society. And this is still going on. So when I saw that, and I was asking myself a question, how a country like the United States can come to that point? I was talking with a friend, and I said, I can take the Constitution of the United States and in front of each phrase, I can put a Bible verse. I don't see that. So, I'm asking myself the question, why that? And so far, the answer that I can see is lack of discipleship. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of teaching. There are a lot of, I was reading an article, someone did a survey, and I was surprised by one of the questions in the survey. are you a Christian or a disciple?
Mm-hmm.
I said, okay, is there a difference being a Christian and being a disciple?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that questions asked to Christian in the U.S., for me, this is a problem. So it showed me that something happened that has led the church in North America in a path that is not good. And then when we started implementing PMF here, what it is producing in different contexts, when I hear people say, no, it will not work in the US, it will not work in the West, I say, well, it is about listening to God through His Word. It is about obeying. It is about sharing. Okay, all these principles, can we do it in the US or not?
Yeah.
I think the issue is we have put in place institutions. So we have just put God aside, and we are doing church, doing ministry according to our own mind, the culture. Now, it is all about management. Sometimes in the church, when there is a problem, people want to use management principle to solve problems. It means that we have put God aside. So when I'm looking at that, and I say, let's do this in the US to show that it will work. This principle will work. It will not look the same like what is happening in Africa. Even in Africa, they don't look the same. The principles are the same, but let me give you an example. A brother that you know, Hassan in Niger, the first time he started the Discovery Bible study with students, he called me and he said, Younoussa, it is not working. I said, why? He said, well, we read the Bible. I ask questions, people don't answer, they are looking at me. So this will not work here. So I will just go ahead and teach them. I said, okay, no, don't do that. Just think a little bit. I said, describe the group? He said, they are students and they are Muslim. And I said, okay, you know, any Muslim, no matter how many diploma he has, when it comes to spiritual issues, he will sit down and someone else will teach him. This is the expectation. And when you read and you ask questions, even if they are university students, they will not answer because this is a religious thing, it is spiritual issues. So they are expecting you who know to teach them. So instead of just reading, tell the story. And then just put characters in the story. And then ask them, if you were that person, how will you reply? How will you behave? And then we'll see. Mm-hmm. And then he did that. And then the following week he called me and said, it is working. Say, it will work. The principle will work everywhere, but depending on the context, the form will change. Yeah. But the principle will not change.
Yeah. Let me bring in Chris Galanos. He's lurking out there on this. Chris is the author of From Megachurch to Multiplication. If you haven't read that book, you need to go out to Amazon and order it after this. Megachurch to Multiplication. So, Chris, you know, you had a... Oh,
yeah, I have it.
Got it
right. Harry. I love it.
Can you? I know you have to run for a prayer time, but can you just give us a brief answer? What do you think in terms of why did you turn your megachurch into a bunch of small UMM churches?
I get that question a lot, Roy. I'm sure that surprises you. And before I start, Younoussa, I just want to say it's great to be with you, brother. I've read a lot about what God
Thank you. Good to see you too.
It's awesome to be on here with you today. And Harry, good to see you, man. Hey, Roy, let me answer the first question. I love when people ask, like Harry was responding to earlier, can movements happen in the West? And usually they're not asking that thinking you're going to, give a positive. I mean, they're asking that usually with kind of a negative connotation, right? Like you should say no, even if you say yes, because surely God couldn't do it here, right? Yeah. And so I love saying this when people ask that. I'll often respond, it seems like in almost virtually every place movements are happening in the world today, before they happened, somebody was saying it could never happen there. Mm-hmm. Like the Bojapuri is an example, right? The graveyard of modern missions. Movements can break out, in China, in the underground, house churches of China, but not in the graveyard of modern missions. And then it breaks out in the graveyard of modern missions. Or they said that about the Middle East, I know, and then it breaks out in the Middle East. Or I'm sure people said that about what's happening in Africa, and it breaks out in Africa. So I'm encouraged, Roy, Harry, and Younoussa, that people are saying it could never happen in America for this reason or that or the other, because that tells me it's about to happen. We're almost there, because they're saying it couldn't happen here. And it's almost like testing God, and saying, God, just show the world that you love America too, and that you want to bring mighty movements of your spirit here. And so I think really the question isn't, can movements happen here? I agree with Harry. I'm ready to pound the table and say yes. I think the question is, are we willing to raise the sails such that if the wind of the Spirit chooses to blow into those sails, we'll see movement? I think in America, or at least in our context, in American church context, which can be very lukewarm, I think at times, we would like to see movements. Maybe we're not sure they can happen here, but we're not sure we want to raise the sails either. We're not sure we want to focus on God's word and multiply extraordinary prayer and so on and so forth. And so I think that it's important, before people say, well, I'm not sure if it could happen in America, to get together with some folks in America and raise the sails and begin to live out these principles, and to let God set your heart on fire for him, and begin to go out with a disciple-making focus, multiplying disciples and multiplying churches. So then the last thing, Roy, I'd say too, related to this question, is we're seeing positive signs in the West. We're seeing some multiplication happen in some circles. Some of the documented movements that Justin Long is documenting in his dashboard, a lot of them are among the unreached in the U.S., but we're seeing good signs of some second generation and some third generation growths in multiple streams in parts of our country. So that encourages me, you guys, that we may be on the brink of something. And I'm just reminded of Jesus's words. I think this is true of North America too. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. So we need more people in North America working in the harvest. And not, like Roy said, not just leaving the church building to do outside the church building what you were doing inside the church building. Leaving the church building to do outside the church building what we should have been doing, whether we were in a church building or not, all along, which is making disciples that multiply and planting churches that reproduce themselves. So I'm encouraged. I believe it can happen here. I think hopefully we're on the brink of something, and I love that people are saying it couldn't, because I think that means we're close. And then, Roy, to your second question as to why we would go from megachurch to multiplication, I'll give you the long answer, but here's the super short answer. We started praying and asking God, what do you want us to do? And he led us to leave kind of the megachurch legacy model and begin to multiply disciples and churches. So we love DMM, and we could talk about the strategy and all that, but at the end of the day, like I encourage pastors, Revelation 2 and 3, same thing Jesus said to all the churches was, if you have ears to hear what the Spirit of the Lord is saying to your church. And we believe that through prayer and fasting, God spoke to us, and he led us to DMM and in this direction. And so we've tried to do our best to follow him.
Can I ask a question to Chris?
Sure. If you can stand my dog
Chris,
bark.
I like the picture of sailing. It seemed to me that people who say that it will not work here, it can be in the US or in France or anywhere else, they have built a system. They have built, they have a paradigm that they don't want to change and have GMM fit in that. It is like someone has a bottle of 1 liter and he used just to keep 1 liter of water. Now he wants 2 liters, but he doesn't want to change the bottle. So it will not work. So, Chris, what are maybe 2 or 3 paradigms that you had to change to move from megachurch to movement?
Appreciate the question. Yeah, just briefly, because Roy, you may have something else you want to discuss. Younoussa, thanks for the question. I would say here are some paradigms that American church pastors like myself have to wrestle to the ground in order to prepare to possibly have success in pursuing movements. Number one, we've got to do away with the clergy laity divide. That's still hurting us. From the Reformation, we got this beautiful, from the scriptures that was renewed in the Reformation, this beautiful doctrine of the priesthood of all believers, where God can speak to believers, ordinary people like John and Peter, and they can go out, telling others about what they've seen and heard. Younoussa, I think in the American church, basically we have a paid person on a stage that preaches to everybody else, kind of like a priest, almost in a Catholic setting. And in the laity, the ordinary people are not strategically empowered to go out among the lost, among their family and friends, coworkers, neighbors, and wherever else the Lord may lead them, and make disciples. So I think number one, it's saying to, it's believing enough in ordinary people, God being able to use ordinary people, Younoussa, enough to empower them. One thing Victor would always tell us from the Bojapuri movement is one of their values, he calls it, is a culture of empowerment of ordinary believers, a culture of empowerment. And I just thought, man, I think we're missing that in the West. So I think that's a very important paradigm that has to change, that we have to believe enough in ordinary, the laity, and again, maybe lose the language. We have to believe enough in disciples that they can go and make disciples. So Younoussa, I'd say that's one. I think maybe one more is that we tend to, where we're supposed to worship only God and only love God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. In the West, we can really love and worship our models. We really like them. We like tradition. We like the way we've always done it. And so it can be difficult, I think, sometimes for pastors and others to change, because this is what really impacted your life, or this is what you're used to, or the cost of change seems too high, if that makes sense. So I think we've got to, in the West, we've got to be willing to evaluate our models, evaluate how we're doing things, and be willing to change if the Holy Spirit would lead us. And I think tradition is very strong, not just in the West, I hear everywhere. And one of the principles of DMM training, lesson number 11, is church tradition is stronger than the devil. And we always laugh when we get to that point, because those of us that are American pastors know that's true. And so we have to, some traditions are very good, Younoussa, but we have to hold traditions with a loose grip and allow the Lord to adjust things if he would want to. So I'll leave it at there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're muted, Roy.
Roy, you are muted.
Well, my wife likes me that way. Harry, thanks, Chris, so much for jumping in here. I know you got to run to that prayer meeting, but Harry, he said something that sort of reminded me of something I hear you say frequently, is that what you're one with is what you're one to. That kind of creates some resistance. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, and I'll incorporate what Chris introduced about ordinary people. If in fact the approach is, can you come join us in a configuration of church that really fits me, but it may not fit you, that's a challenging scenario. Some people respond, most people don't. If you come and say that God is there for you to save you, and people say, I want to be saved, then that's what they're going to think. You can go on and on. But if in fact the Spirit of God is drawing somebody and they're spiritually receptive, and you say, do you want to be a follower of Jesus, to obey the King in everything? If that is the essential message, then people will reproduce the process. because it's not foreign to what they were envisioning. So in terms of coupling the crisis with DMM in the United States, just some practical, tangible kinds of things. One of the things that we should do is we should be praying out loud. Here's what I mean by that. We could form our Zoom groups and be praying explicitly about the stopping of the plague and the repairing of the damage, but we can also use Zoom to get to our networks and ask people, hey, what are you facing that I need to pray about? Because God is on the move in this situation. We can also be using that mechanism to be able to find out, okay, what are the needs that you're facing, so that we can be a catalyst and provide the channel, the creativity, and then coach the process. That you can also, I'm very fond of saying the ministry is always with arm reach. I might change that now these days to say the ministry is only a click away. You can get to people, hear their heart, find out where they're at, meet the need, and you can organize those who want to serve into something to do, and then coach the process for the spiritually receptive. If that's the way that you come to faith, then you're going to think it's normal. You're going to be doing it the rest of your days because that's what was your experience. Very few people are going to listen to a please come to church that's kind of a foreign thing, listen to a message and respond to it. On a percentage basis, that's not it. How does it happen? It happens when you meet them where they're at, you explain with clarity or help them discover with clarity who God is, what relationship he wants, they respond, and you get them to reproduce that dynamic. What you win them with through that process is what they're going to be downstream.
So that creates the resistance for many people who walked an aisle or had someone walk them into faith who had tons of answers that they answered their questions about the Bible and stuff. And so that's the way they feel like everyone else needs to come. I mean, is that what I'm hearing from you?
Yes, and it's not that it's bad. I don't want to get into the, oh, well, that's a wrong way to do evangelism or to do outreach. Mm-hmm. The question really, where's the biggest impact and the most strategic? Mm-hmm. And you think about human nature in that. You think about people want to be heard. They want to be respected. They want to be able to process the stuff that is coming to them. They want to be able to make their own decisions and not feel manipulated and so forth. And if you're there representing the mind and the heart of God and giving a picture as his ambassador of his heart, then that's what they're going to be attracted to and what they're going to reproduce later. So here's just a colloquial way to say it. Before they get married to him, they're dating you.
That's interesting, Harry. So let's go back to the big picture for a moment. What is it you think that the New Generations team can offer to the North American situation?
Yeah. The headline there is discern what is the kingdom opportunity for you inside this crisis. What happens in a crisis? People are asking questions. What is God doing? Well, he's trying to get our attention. He's trying to bring us together. He's trying to think about things that are really important. He wants us to have opportunities to do good. He wants to take the ugly and the evil that's everywhere and prove the promise of Romans that don't be overcome by that evil, overcome evil with good. That means be proactive. That means look for the opportunity and make sure that it's not just a point in time. Okay, we met the needs, we provided the food, we gave the mass, we spoke in comfort. What you've done is you've laid a track, and a track has a destination. Make sure that you follow and you coach the people coming with you to follow that track to its conclusion, because that conclusion is not service. That is an element in the track. The destination is not only do they come to saving faith, but they choose to obey and they reproduce in others of the same kind. Make sure you're coaching that process. This is probably a once-in-a-lifetime kind of opportunity for the church in the United States to dramatically expand into circles of influence that would never come to them. So we're not saying, hey, come to us and be at our church, learn our culture, and follow our ways. What we're saying is we're going to be there for you. And as you are, you're going to feel the gospel, not just hear it. And you're going to understand what you should be doing with the people that you relate to.
So let's say I'm an organization leader, a church leader, a network. I've got to work with a network of churches someplace, or I have a specific organization. When you think about new generations leaning into the North American space, what is it we offer to folks?
What we're offering is a concept that is not business as usual, that actually points to magnitudes of order of greater impact.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, when I was listening to you and you gave an explanation, why megachurch to multiplication, my version of that, just as an outsider looking at you, is greater impact. What you had in the megachurch was incredible, but it also wasn't the full potential. So the first thing, Roy, is concept. The next thing is to be a catalyst to help give them the tools along with the mindset to actually get it done. And then the next thing is to be a coach to help them on the journey. It is a total fallacy to say, hey, I can take all the right information, I can give it to you, I'll leave you the notebook, and I'll hug you twice and think you're going to be able to get it and do it. You got to walk with people. It's like a staircase, you have to give them something, then they got to practice it. Then you got to give them more, they got to practice it again. And you got to keep pointing to the top staircase. What does that look like? At the top of this staircase, on this journey we're going together, you're going to find two things to be true. You'll be able to do this effectively, so you are seeing multiplication in your natural networks, and you're going to be able to give it away to others so they can do the same. That's what I think that God has enabled us to be able to offer to others who are have the heart and the mind to say, okay, where we've been in the past may be great, but it's not good enough. We got to go on from here into new places, new ways, new peoples, new levels of impact.
All right. So Younoussa, when you think about you guys and new generations offering to individuals or organizations, churches, and what do you think can be offered in that regard?
Well, I think what we can offer is the experience that God has given us here in Africa in different contexts. How we have seen the same principle work in different contexts. I think we can share that experience. We can also think we can pray. And alongside the sharing of experience, I think we can add to that coaching, because I think sometimes it is very important to. I have several people, they say it is not working, and then I say, okay, let me see how you are doing. And I've seen that when I spend a couple of days with them to see how they are doing it, and then we discuss, and then we share, they say, oh, I did not know that. So the coaching is very important. And coaching is not, let me say, transplanting trees, but it is planting the seeds. The way I look for person of peace here, I think in the US it will be different. Because let's say I like you using the way people socialize in my research of person of peace. And the way people socialize, it is different when you are here and when you are in the US. But the principle will be the same. But I think because of the experience that the team in Africa has had in different contexts, we have seen how the same principle can be implemented in different contexts, what to look for, how to deal with, some obstacles. So we can bring that coaching also.
Okay, excellent. So, Harry,
and a lot of stories.
Yeah, I know that that I've been tasked myself, with the new generation's North American situation, and you're an incredible mentor and help to that. I wonder if we think about it at its base level, can you just delineate for us fundamentally, let's say I'm a local church leader, pastor, whatever, what has to change in my mind for me to be able to lean into a movement type of thinking?
Yeah, you got a couple of things, Roy, that make all the difference. The first is you have to have a new definition of success. Mm-hmm. Everything routes from that. When you have a definition of success by whatever language, you don't have to borrow ours, whatever language it says, here's what I want. Big picture, long term. I want the people in the pew to have obedience-based reproductive discipleship in their natural networks that can have the quality that's required and can do it without the infrastructure supplying all the leadership and the money and so forth. Okay, whatever version. If that's where you're headed, if that's what reflects your heart. Now, from the place of a definition of success, now we can start building a strategy. I mean, it is useless to build a strategy to get there if you don't know where you're going. So now we're backing up. Okay, there's a strategy here. And you distill the strategy based on the definition of success. Now you have to deal with the structure. Okay, here's where we are. Okay, there's certain things that can change, certain things that aren't going to change. Okay, we all get that. So with the hand that we're dealt, what are we going to do to get where we want to go? Now, with that in place, so you got definition of success, you got a strategy, you're talking about the structure. Now we're working on paradigm. Bottom line, the narrative has to change. Okay, I've been 85 different countries in the world, hundreds, maybe thousands of ministry interactions. Doesn't matter where you went. If you sit down in any pew in any place and ask the guy next to you, the ordinary person, hey, why did God leave you on this earth after he saved you? What do you think? You're never going to hear in any percentage responses to bring the kingdom of God into my circle of influence. They don't perceive it as the role that God assigned to all of us. Therefore, they're on the sidelines guilt-free. It's not like, oh, I know I should, but I just don't feel comfortable. I don't know what to do. I don't know how. I don't have time. I'm too busy. That's not the primary problem. The primary problem is a paradigm that says it's not my job until there's an awakening, an epiphany among the people of God that says this is his assignment to each and every one who claims the name. And I am going to follow him by obeying and doing in my circle of influence whatever I can, trusting the Spirit of God. And I'm willing to launch out and to make that true and trust that God's going to give me what I need as I need it to be able to answer the issues. Now, if that's the paradigm, then you can supply the coaching. Sure, there's very sophisticated people who are well-trained. They're great thinkers. They're mobilizers. Those people can get Joe and Sally Smith in the game, because without Joe and Sally Smith, ordinary people, we cannot win. The only way, absolutely only way to complete the Great Commission, including North America, is when ordinary people are multiplying disciples in their natural networks. Leadership has to give them that paradigm, then has to give them a track to run on, and then has to give them the coaching so that it can be true long-term, widespread, and repetitive. It happens again without you.
So I know the history of West Africa, and I know that it's chronicled in miraculous movements, but that's only that's the last half of the story. That's like the top of the cream on the top of it. It doesn't show the underground, the ugly part of getting things started. And how many restarts and retraining and recoaching and all that kind of stuff had to take place. Americans are just allergic to failure. I mean, if something doesn't quote work right out of the box, then I'm going to go find the newest DVD series or the newest this or the newest book or whatever, whoever's up on the stage in whatever conference promoting certain things. Are you sort of speaking to that issue of saying that we need to get over ourselves and dig in and show a little bit more perseverance in this process?
Is that for me or for Younoussa?
Doesn't matter. I'm just a hobby horse right now. So
Younoussa, you
Well,
go
Roy,
first. Follow.
Yeah, I thought that it was only the French people who want to see things well done before starting.
yeah.
What happened, at least in my own context, there were. It is not like any initiative that we started was successful. We started thinking that, like, I recruited people. I said, "Oh, he will do great," but after 2 months, it was a failure.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a process. I had to go through, I think, 3 training to really get German. The first one I was rejecting. The second one, I said, okay, it is working, but I was not getting the whole thing. It was after the 3rd training, and between the training, there were a lot of discussion in the team with David Watson, with Jerry Trasel. There were a lot of discussion. So it took me 3 training to, let me say, start being to the point where I say, okay, I think I have grabbed the concept, I have grabbed the whole idea. Now what I need is to implement and learn more and make it my own, I have to make it my own, not something that I'm borrowing. I have to integrate that deep in me. And this, it took some failures, some struggles, some even questioning some of the principles. Person of peace. I've seen people, I say, oh, this is the person of peace, praise God. But I find out that no, it was not the person of peace. So I had to learn to watch, to listen, to see, okay, this is what I look at. And I said, this is the person of peace, but it is wrong. So I have to check, okay, next time when I see this, it doesn't mean that it is the person of peace.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a learning process. And I think we cannot avoid that. If you want to avoid that, it will be too superficial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as we end here, let me just maybe put the cookies on the lower shelf and answer a couple of these questions out of the box here. We have a North American team at New Generations, Chris Galanos, Steve Steinhaus, he's on with us, focuses in on Muslim work. Steve, you still there? You want to chime in and just share your heart for reaching the Muslims in the U.S. context or the U.S. and Canada? I think I have to make you, hold on a second. I have to let him talk. Let me get to him. It's a bit like all right. You're permitted to talk. Steve, you still there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Gotcha, man. Great.
Okay, great. Hi, Roy. Yeah, I just wanted to underscore a lot of the things that I've heard this morning when it comes to working with Muslims and many immigrants, actually, but especially the Muslim populations here in the U.S. and in Canada. The things that have been said on this call, I think, are multiplied in terms of their importance. We have to, I'm just going to pull some of the phrases that I've heard this morning. We have to lay a different track because many Muslims are just allergic, not so much to the gospel, not to the Bible, but to the vehicle of church and the way that we do it. And so we need to work in a different way. I like what Younoussa said. We need to plant the seed. I'm interpreting here, but I think he means planting the seed of the gospel, not transplanting the trees. So transplanting the tree of the way that we do church as opposed to the gospel is a huge problem when it comes to Muslims. And so as I've lived here now in the States for a few years after coming back from Southeast Asia, I've seen a curious thing, and that is that many of us, when we operate overseas, we understand these principles that we need to do things differently to reach different people overseas. But when Muslims come to the US or Canada, we say, well, now that they're here, they obviously want to integrate into our society, therefore they can integrate into our churches. We forget even the language barrier itself is often so huge that that becomes impractical, but how much more cultural barriers and other ways that they're thinking that prohibit them from wanting to do that. So we really need to do things differently if we're going to reach Muslims in this country. But I've met even many missionaries who come back, and it's as if they forgot all their missiology, all the things that we've been talking about in this call that they've been using overseas, and they've been seeing fruit sometimes. But when they come back here, they just say, hey, well, invite them to church. And that, of course, kills the potential for movement. So I just want to say very much in agreement with everything I've heard this morning on this Zoom, but it definitely applies even more so when we're talking about reaching Muslim and immigrant populations. So help us, everyone who's on this call. We very much need to get serious about addressing this huge need in North America.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it very much. You know, as we think about building a network, there are about 57 cities that represent 50% of the population in North America, in US and Canada. And, you know, our hope is to be able to work with, network, catalyze networks of disciple makers in all of those 57 cities to be able to create circles of accountability where there are teams of people who say, I take responsibility for the lostness in this area. And whatever chapter in your life is that chapter is going to be spent. For me, it's my last chapter. I'm 65, and I know that, you know, if I don't have much time left. So this last chapter for me, you know, I put a circle down, and I'm accountable to God for lostness in that particular area. And so in my local area, following Harry's strategy, it's Kansas City, and it's an organization called Disciple KC. Just to throw out something here, I found a really good resource that's helpful for legacy church pastors to be able to get their minds around multiplication. It's not a DMM resource by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a resource that comes from a group called Christ Together, christtogether.org. They have a primer, and that primer helps kind of move the conversation from being committed to a collective strategy of doing church to a mobilization and multiplication strategy of doing church. There's some great metaphors in it, and it's maybe an intermediate step. A lot of times when you try to get, you sit with someone in a local church and you say, hey, you know, here's this thing and anybody can do it. And it goes, you know, it's just read the Bible and obey, pray and share. And they have all these questions that come up, you know, just crazy stuff. And this resource is a great resource to help them begin to get ready for that discussion. So if you go out, I think you can get it for free on their website, christtogether.org. It's the Gospel Primer. and use it, for a resource. We're building new training models. Harry, I know you've been involved, back in the city team days, as we both were, through this process where thousands and thousands of people were trained, but the coaching network wasn't built. I don't know if you have a quick moment to speak to that and what you feel like maybe was something we missed in that era.
Yeah. There's an old phrase that says, well begun is half done. And you know what? That's half done. The idea is to bring it to conclusion. And people don't just understand where they're supposed to go and understand how to get there. They need help along the way. It's a rare person that can say, oh, I get it now. I know what to do, and I'll do it on my own without any encouragement, any additional tools, any what do I do in the dead ends, etc. So the idea of coaching is taking an ownership attitude in somebody else's success. There's a passage in Jeremiah that says, in your success, I will have my success. It's a paraphrase. It's what it means. The idea here is, if our purpose is to help you be successful to the point where you will have the purpose of helping somebody else be successful, I've got to walk with you. I can't just point it and say, hey, go get them, Tiger. And I can't just say, here's the books with all the good stuff in it. Life doesn't work that way. So, one of the phrases we use is go slow to go fast. What does that mean? You're going to invest in fewer, deeper, so they really get it and they can really give it away. Does that sound like, a strategy with 12, 70, and then the multitudes where we heard that before? The whole idea is the other side of viral. And viral right now has got a bad name. It started out as a bad name, a virus, and then it went to the things that are great, viral through the internet, where your teaching can go around the world. Now it's got a bad name again. The day's going to come when it's going to be redeemed again, and we recognize somebody gave the real stuff to somebody else who was able to pass it on. That's the game. That's the goal. And I tell you, one last thing from me. Everybody has to understand, who struggles with, is this possible in North America? They have to understand the enemy is all in against this, all in. And you know why? Here's why. America's got this great legacy of funding missions, sending missionaries, and everything else. But here's the crux of it. When Satan and his demons get together in a council of war and they discuss where the threats are at, the bottom line is they're not worried about the next megachurch, and they're not worried about the next Billy Graham. They are worried about Joe and Sally Smith getting up out of the pew and saying, God, I will obey in my circle of influence. You're going to have to bring the strength. You're going to have to bring the power. But this is what you told me to do, and it's going to happen. And oh, by the way, there's other folks out there like New Generations and other organizations that are going to give me the tools and give me the coaching to help me get to the goal. It shall be done. Mm-hmm. If that happens in any percentage at all, where the ordinary person in the pew actually practically gets up and tries to apply, it's a revolution. Yeah. People have used the illustration before. I'll keep it short. You got 100 believers, more or less. We've had 100 on this call, who will make one disciple in 1 year and get them to do the same. Well, it goes from 100 to 2 to 4 to 8, whatever. In 26 years, it's 7 billion. And that is why the enemy is all in against this. So whatever barriers you think you face, yeah, you got to work around them. Do you have to accommodate your culture? Yeah, you got to. But at the bottom line, you got to recognize the enemy is all in against this. And so you're going to have to do the heavy lifting in the heavenlies if you expect to get the job done.
Yeah. Just as last word here before we go off, because we're at our witching hour, people are asking for some practical things now. And, we've seen multiplication here in Kansas City. I'm in a northeastern suburb, upper middle class type, folks. And, looking at poverty, what's the poverty here? Poverty, marriage, poverty's loneliness, poverty is sometimes financial, in a sense. People with too much money don't spend it very well. And so using those kinds of access ministries to help people learn to start reading the Bible and discover what God has to say about life in their particular areas. For instance, we're just dealing with a couple right now, and we see a lot of marriage problems happening right now. I think that's one of the things that's going to come out of this, is that there's a lot of marriages that won't survive the stay-at-home orders. And so, what's the primary biblical teaching on marriage, for people? And unfortunately, thinking like Christians, we think, Ephesians 5, let's get the roles right, 1 Peter 3, that kind of stuff. But really, for us, the primary role for marriage is Philippians 2, 1 through 11. And if a couple could get that down, especially think of one another as more important than yourself. And oh, by the way, here's the perfect example of that, Jesus, and here's what he did. That becomes the great opportunity to help save a marriage. And so we've leaned into that. But we have our leaders going and building safety networks in their neighborhoods right now. So they've taken letters and they've taped them to the doors of their neighbors and friends and said, here's my name, my number. If you need help, I'm here, contact me. Here's a place. Some of them use Facebook. Some of them use an app called Band. Some of them, or a few of them maybe use Next, not that many of them, and said, here, let's gather here. Let's stay connected. Built directories for their neighborhood, and then gone back around and passed those out and distribute them digitally on their Facebook pages or their Band apps and that kind of stuff. So, it's a great time to pull people together and begin to connect with them, because everyone's feeling unsafe. And if you become a place of safety, you actually might be the person of peace in that your neighborhood that you're living in. And when this thing comes undone, the opportunity to be able to do some things. And yes, we've used Zoom a lot for groups. We have tons of groups meeting over Zoom. We find that it's not a great place to start with people you haven't been relating to before. People don't really gravitate to those kind of platforms. So that's just a few tidbits there. Thanks so much for everyone. Thanks, Harry, for being here. Younoussa, your good friend Ken Baker, sends his good wishes.
Thank you,
Kenny. So but thanks everyone. If you want to get this, it'll be housed on a YouTube channel connected with my name, entitled Disciple Making Movements. We'll also put it back out on the New Generations Facebook page, the North American expression of that. So go out to New Generations North America, like that page, and when we put it up, it'll let you know that we've loaded this if you want to pass it around and show your friends. Younoussa, would you pray for us today and close our time for us?
Sure. Lord, thank you for this time together, and thank you for all the things that have been shared. Lord, I pray and I trust that you will not only make movement multiply in North America and in the West, but Lord, you will also, as you have been doing that for years now, to continue to make your church in that part of the world stronger. So Lord, I just want to commit all your servants in North America who are implementing the movement principle. So Lord, I pray that you give more success, make it work, and use that to revive your church, use that to bring your church back to you. So Lord, I want to thank you and I bless you. Thank you for every person, every ministry who has connected today in this Zoom webinar. Bless everyone. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.